in that junior role in the beginning, moving ultimately into the CEO role, is I really like building a business, building a team, building processes to optimize that performance. And so that was the lion's share of my career until we sold it to MetLife in 2020. And I honestly thought I would continue to run MetLife Pet Insurance for the duration of my career. And I think MetLife would have been very happy with that too, but I learned quickly I don't love working for an enormous business. There were a lot of culture changes for me specifically, and it wasn't just that I didn't like having a boss, because I always had a boss, I always had a board, but I didn't like talking about doing work. I really missed doing work, and so I made the difficult decision to leave in 2022, and it was probably a year later that Chris was the catalyst for saying, why don't we look at buying something for you to run? I'm like, that seems very counterintuitive. I want a job to earn money, not spend money on buying my next job. But that's ultimately what we decided to explore starting in 2023, I'd say, in earnest. But before we get into flooring concepts, I'll let you share your background.
Yeah, I spent probably the first half of my career in corporate America. Similar experience to Katie, didn't love it. I'm now on my third startup. It's about 6.5 years old now. So I spend most of my time working in that company. I help out as needed, strategy, financial planning, that kind of stuff with the flooring business, but Katie runs it mostly day to day. Was involved in the finding of the business and then the acquisition of the business, but have put it in her very capable hands since then.
And I think that's one of the things that we knew as we were evaluating opportunities. We are great partners and strong complements to one another. But if we're in the same lane, we can trip over each other. That's why Chris is responsible for all meal planning. I'm responsible for all vacation planning. We knew that both of us having active roles in the day-to-day operations of whatever business that we acquire probably wouldn't be a great fit for our family dynamic. So about a year ago, just a little over a year ago, it was the summer of 2024, we found this business listed with BizBuySell. We've been working with Acquira since earlier that spring. So we were still, kind of drinking from the fire hose. We were still going through the think if the training. Both of us in our startup career were very familiar with the operations of a business, but stepping into an industry that we did not have any experience or familiarity with was a little uncomfortable to consider. And we looked at a couple of opportunities. As we developed our investment thesis, one of the things that we changed pretty early on was the geography. We were very open-minded when it came to the industry. We wanted to concentrate in home services. We were really, connected with a lot of AEs through Acquira that had had a lot of success in that plumbing, HVAC, electrical, roofing. We thought, okay, this makes sense. There's a strong case to be made for why these types of businesses can succeed. But we cast a pretty wide net. We're based in Louisville, Kentucky. So we were looking at a radius of 200 miles, roughly, I think, to start, or a direct flight from Louisville, Kentucky. So we were looking at businesses as far away as Charlotte, North Carolina, but businesses in Nashville, Indianapolis. And as we started to look at the Sims and really evaluate the opportunities, one thing that became very clear when we had a second grader and a ninth grader at the time, now third and 10th grader, is that this is going to be a real challenge for our family dynamic. And part of the reason we're investing or looking at investing in a business like this is because, of course, the financial opportunity, but it's also so we have the flexibility to live the life that we want to live. And if one or both of us isn't able to, take our kids to soccer practice or attend academic banquets or, participate in our kids' day-to-day lives, that was going to be a sacrifice that felt like, well, why didn't we just keep me working at MetLife and earn a paycheck and then, still live life here in Louisville, Kentucky? So we really tightened our radius. We said we want something within 20 miles, which we had a lot of caution from the Acquira team of like, okay, that may change your timeline significantly. And we thought that was worth the wait. But fortunately, we found this opportunity on BizBuySell pretty quickly. So even it was probably September when we officially tightened our radius. And I think this opportunity had come up in August. And so I think it was October when we got an LOI in place. I think several things that worked out well for putting the LOI together and getting it accepted so quickly was, one, our business, the sellers, the former owners, had an opportunity on the table before. So they'd gotten to the LOI stage. They'd started to negotiate a purchase agreement with another prospective buyer. And that opportunity fell apart because the prospective acquirer had another opportunity that he was pursuing, and that was coming together a little more quickly. So he let the flooring business go. I think that helped us a lot because Flooring Concepts had already gone out on several dates with a prospective match. So I think it made them much more ready as they were evaluating us as potential partners during the transition. I think, I don't know, it's like their pump had already been primed, so to speak. So next steps, we were already working, that was another thing that was an advantage, I think, working with Flooring Concepts, because they had already started working with another potential acquirer. They had also gone through some financial due diligence from a lending perspective with Huntington Bank. So we picked up that baton where the previous prospective buyer had dropped it, which was great because they had already looked at the business. Huntington had, they just needed a few more months of financial statements. And they put together a pretty attractive offer to us. At that time, Huntington had additional incentives if the real estate was included in the transaction, which we were not dead set on, but much more open to when we found out we could get a better interest rate and better terms on the loan overall. So, one to skip a few, we went through the diligence phase, which was relatively benign, relatively easy. I think the only sort of surprises were just blips in the timeline, which everyone had cautioned us at Acquira, at Huntington. You think you're going to close on date X, add 30 to 45 days. And that's exactly what happened. We had hoped that we would close at the end of January, and we closed March 7th of 2025. So that's kind of the quick version of the how did we get to close phase. Are there any questions that we can answer for you guys about that, or are you interested in the next chapter?
Hi, it's Larry. I have a question.
Yeah.
Like you said initially that you had a 200-mile radius search.
Yeah.
Were you planning to relocate? Because
we were not planning to relocate. We were planning to commute. So we were looking at a 4 to 5 day per week commute, maybe in some circumstances daily. Now that we are in the business, I am so glad we held firm on the geography. From a networking perspective, from a business development perspective, even though, and I don't know how many of you guys might be familiar with Louisville, Kentucky, it sits right in the middle of the state, but on the northern border that borders Indiana, right on the Ohio River. And there is a distinct disconnect between the Southern Indiana community and the greater Louisville community. Greater Louisville includes Southern Indiana, but this business being located in Southern Indiana, there's a separate chamber of commerce. There's a lot of the workforce prefers to work in Southern Indiana rather than Louisville, Kentucky. Just being able to build a network and build a community is so important. And I think if we would have been commuting or trying to get out of there by 3 p.m. on a Friday and get back home to our family, I don't know that we would be able to build the relationships that would be necessary to build the business.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add that, it also significantly narrowed our scope of the businesses that we were looking for. To have that sort of arm's length relationship with the business, meaning that we weren't in the city, it required us to look at certain businesses that had already developed a management team, that were already running the business, that was almost more of an absentee owner. situation, which are much harder to find and are much more competitive. Where when we found a local business, it allowed us to think about it differently, understanding that we could be more hands-on, at least in the beginning, until we get the business to where we want it to be, which is probably going to be more hands-off and more high-level management and strategy as opposed to sort of day-to-day operations.
That's the dream. Thanks.
Yep.
And that was one of the big limitations of the business as we were evaluating it prior to close, and even now, is that there were two gentlemen who were the owners, 75% and 25%. They did agree to seller financing, and they did agree to contract with us for a year for the transition. Then there is a woman who's the head of accounting, and a gentleman who runs the warehouse. So basically two owners who were doing all of the selling, one woman handling bookkeeping and accounting, and one person handling warehouse operations. And then all of our installation crews for the commercial side of the business, which is roughly 85% of the work we do. And then the balance, residential, all of our installers are 1099, so not W-2 employees. So even though we have a large team, a large network of people that we work with, the only full-time employees were the woman who does the bookkeeping and the gentleman who runs the warehouse. So there was a lot tied up in the former ownership. And that was the big question for us, is how transferable are these relationships? And how readily will I step into a leadership position and be able to assume some of the responsibilities for generating revenue? I saw the question there, how much was the seller financing? It was 15% that they agreed to, correct? And 15% just on the business. So actually the real estate had a different ownership structure. So 15% of the business. One thing that we were prepared for from day one was that these owners would be very kind and cooperative, but maybe not so collaborative. We were expecting a very limited short-term engagement, even though there was a commitment for a year, and there was, at least during the meetings that we had, a real appetite for, enabling us to continue their legacy. I was a little bit worried that once they got a taste of retirement that, they'd cash a check and maybe move on very quickly. That was the first surprise, in a very, very good way, that they were very invested in making sure I learned the business, and not just learn who's who in the business, but also the nuts and bolts of how we do measurements, how we do takeoffs of commercial plans provided by architects or designers, how to measure a residence with a tape measure, all those types of things, big and small. And I have made tons of mistakes in 7 months, but luckily on a smaller scale, on a more manageable scale, very fixable. And it's taught me a ton about troubleshooting and problem solving and opportunities for how we can grow the business in next year and the year beyond as well. I have really been focused, especially in the first 100 days, but I'd say the first 6 months certainly, in observing and learning. Being as respectful as I can. There was nothing that was especially broken that needed fixed. They had a very robust business, performing well from a revenue and a profitability perspective. A little old-fashioned in how they manage their finances. Basically, even though they were, handling their accounting from an accrual method, the owners looked at cash in the checking account to evaluate how well are we doing. To the point that even when I was talking about hitting our line of credit and investing in a few other things for the business, I think just more casually, those guys were aghast that there was less than $100,000 in the checking account. I mean, they were getting to the point where there was $500,000 and $600,000 in the checking account, with just these resources sitting there available to invest in inventory, available to invest in human resources, but they managed it very conservatively. So I think that was my whole point in that rambling story, was just that they have been great partners in helping transition the business. I think it's only now maybe 6.5, 7 months in, that we're starting to feel there's one gentleman who intends to not partner with us in any regard after the end of the year. And I think that's perfect. And almost the end of the year can't come quickly enough, because there has been now enough change that culturally it feels a little different than the business he founded in 1997. And I think it's a little uncomfortable for him, which makes it uncomfortable for others in the organization, the installer team, that type of thing. So that's just one other tricky cultural element to manage. But quite honestly, I was expecting to have to manage that in March and not in September, October. Any other questions right now?
I think there was a question about the SBA loan. We did shop that a little. The offer from Huntington was by far the most attractive offer that we saw, because at the time they were running a promotional offer where if an SBA loan included real estate, they could significantly extend the term beyond the typical SBA 10-year timeline, and also gave us a more favorable rate. But they also overfunded the loan and offered a revolving line of credit on top of that as well, which gave us a lot of comfortability that we would have plenty of cash to manage this transition and still continue to operate the business without any issues from a cash flow perspective. Hopefully that answered your question. Yep.
Are there other questions or things we can delve into a little more deeply?
Well, I would be interested in knowing how you're planning to grow the business and in what stages.
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the biggest challenges for me earlier this spring, is I had no idea where revenue came from. In terms of, there's all these commercial opportunities. We would bid on jobs maybe in January of 2025, where ground wouldn't even be broken until March of 2026. And then the floors wouldn't be ready for installation until August of 26. And that's when we would order materials and bill for materials and labor and freight and so on. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity for us to grow the business on the Indiana side of the river. We have a lot of experience and expertise in schools, churches, other community and government buildings. But we're also delving into our relationships just with leasing office space in the Louisville on the Kentucky side of the river. We've been able to get into property management on the professional office space, that sort of line of business, and that has been great because that can be very turnkey. As tenants turn over, we get an opportunity to refurbish and refresh 25,000 square feet of office space, for example. So maintaining the strategy that these two original founders, these gentlemen, had started is still incredibly attractive. There are a ton of opportunities to introduce additional efficiencies, to introduce ways to generate more profit from every job, make us work a little more efficiently so we can take on more work, optimize our warehouse space, explore warehouse space on the Kentucky side of the river. So there's plenty of room to grow right here. We actually had another flooring business that we looked at a sim for just a couple of months ago. It was probably a little early for us, but there is starting to be more opportunities to acquire and bolt on, even if not a flooring business, a complementary business such as cabinetry or countertops and granite and stone and that type of thing. So I will say our strategy is still very fluid, and we're still paying close attention to how revenue comes in, how the most profitable revenue comes in. If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said we're leaving so much money on the table when it comes to residential work. However, a job that's $10,000 for a homeowner takes just as much time, energy, resources as a $100,000 job or a $400,000 job for a general contractor. That type of business, you want to make sure it's balanced, and the residential work is counter-cyclical to some of the commercial work. So it's good to build up that business when it's slower on the commercial side as well. But I thought we wanted to be 50-50 residential, and now I'm more committed to the 85-15 split that we enjoy now.
Is it complicated doing business in 2 states? As well as with 1099s, that makes it a lot easier. But
Yes.
with sales tax and...
Yeah, sales tax is the complicating factor. The suppliers that we work with and the manufacturers that we work with have experience in this. There's a lot of dealers that operate in 2 states or a tri-state area. So certain suppliers, if we're selling to a residential customer or commercial customer in Kentucky, we pay the sales tax or the use tax on the materials and charge the end user no tax. Whereas in Indiana, we use our exemption certificate and then charge the customer sales tax on materials and freight only. So there are some complications to that, but there's so many who have come before us who are very generous with their time, energy, and experiences. I've been incredibly pleased with that. Even direct competitors that maybe operate in Louisville or in northern Louisville, Oldham County, which is Prospect, Kentucky, they're willing to share their experiences, lessons they've learned the hard way, and best practices when it comes to, collecting and remitting sales tax. But the payroll piece, interestingly, I put myself on payroll, and I have worked in Indiana before, so I at least had experiences and W-2s that I could compare and make sure our QuickBooks W-2 aligned with what I was expecting or had seen from larger employers like MetLife, for example. So yeah, there are some nuances to it, but not insurmountable challenges.
What about workers' comp, that sort of thing? Does that have to be in 2 states?
It doesn't have to be in 2 states. So that is just in Indiana where our business is domiciled. And even though we have 1099 contractors, some of whom live in Kentucky, some of whom live in Indiana and do work on both sides of the river. But our policy applies to the work that they do and are doing wherever they may be.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting.
And I will say that was one of the things that attracted us about the business, is that probably 90+% of the business's revenue is in Southern Indiana. And I don't know where everybody lives, but for comparison's sake, it would be like buying a business whose 90% of their revenue is in Gary, Indiana, and they're not doing much in Chicago. It's a natural opportunity to target the larger market, even though it's going to be much more competitive. But there's still ample opportunity to sort of wedge our way in and use that much larger market to grow revenue.
In the industry you're in, do your guys have to be licensed?
They do not.
Okay. And do you have a general construction license that you hold in the 2 states?
No, we do not. So we don't have any licensing requirements, which can make it a little bit tricky. One thing that we've done just in the last 6 months is try to grow our installer network. That can obviously be a rate limiting step. We want to make sure that we've got teams of talented crews that can get out there and do customized specialty work, not just lay out rolled goods or lay out hardwood, but can do some of the custom things that a lot of our customers are coming to expect. But not having that licensing requirements means there's room for some bad actors, but we do have a lot of processes in place to do the background checks, to do credit checks, to make sure that we have strong references and make sure that we are in a position to evaluate the quality of their crew and their equipment. Because anybody can say that they have a power stretcher, but to be able to see it and see how functional it is, see how old it is, all of that's important. And that is, again, where this founding team, the 2 former owners that started as installers, they have such a wealth of experience and so much expertise that they've been incredibly helpful to me to make sure I know what to ask, what's relevant. And so I can start to tackle that learning curve as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and you have no seasonality to worry about either.
Only the weather, and only making sure that our installers have the right vehicles. That's one interesting thing. We don't have our own fleet of vehicles. We depend again on our installer network. So they have covered trucks, box trucks, vans, where we can get hard goods and soft goods to the job site. We never ship materials directly to the job site. They always come to our warehouse first for inspection and then get picked up and dispatched to the job site on a daily basis. Helps us manage inventory much more tightly. And yeah, the seasonality is incredibly helpful to our business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other things that we can delve into or answer for you guys?
I'd be curious though sorry, Aaron, you go ahead.
I thank you. I apologize if you've already answered this, but since you're business to business primarily, it sounds like, how are you acquiring new customers? What's your marketing strategy for that?
That's a great question. So right now it's word of mouth and referrals, which again, so much opportunity on the table. One of the things that we've done just today, we extended an offer for an office coordinator position, which may sound like an administrative professional, but it's really a project management role where this person can be the hub for our installers, for our sales team. I'm starting to be more involved in sales, which means visiting job sites, going out and conducting measurements, networking with groups that are leads groups, those sorts of things. We really didn't want to invest aggressively in marketing until we had that position filled, because we felt like we weren't going to have the infrastructure to manage our growth efficiently. So even just adding that one position, growing our team by 20% has been such a gift, and I think will be such a catalyst to grow the business. But truly, networking in the industry has proved to be so important, especially me as a woman, leveraging these relationships in the National Association of Women in Construction. We have very active chapters there. Women in commercial real estate, there's a lot of activity there. And there's a very strong community in this Southern Indiana, Louisville market that wants to make sure that small businesses are supporting small businesses, and that we get more commercial leads and opportunities. Really what my pitch has been to people I've worked with in the past or where we've leased space in the past is just that we'd love the opportunity to bid on their next open project. And if we're cost effective, we'd love the opportunity to do the work. One other thing that we've pursued in just the last couple of months is going through the WeBank certification process to become a certified women-owned business entity. We really had, I guess, a lot of people that cautioned us like, hey, you got to be careful doing that, because once you start growing your business by leveraging such certifications as being a woman-owned business or a minority-owned business, it starts to limit your exit opportunities, because once you sell to a non-minority, you lose a lot of that value. I think our strategy has been, or our thought has been, we're not necessarily buying this business to flip it. We want to buy this business to run it and grow with it and see what we can make of it. And we'll tackle that another day. And we decide to exit and sell to a non-minority, non-woman owner. That's a problem for another day. Right now, we're very much focused on just growth.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Did you have another question, Penelope?
I did. When you took over the business, the two gentlemen who are the owners had done sales, and you said you're just now getting more into sales. So how did you deal with it in that interim period? How did you build a sales team?
So in that interim period, I really, from day one, Chris had a great relationship that he, basically twisted an old friend's arm and said, hey, I know you're a general contractor. Katie's getting active in this flooring business. it'd be super great if you gave her an opportunity. And that was my first commercial job. We closed in March, and I did the bid for it, I think in April.
Something like that. Yeah.
And the owners helped me tremendously in using floor plans to create the measurements. I mean, joke that our youngest daughter and I were doing the same math of area and perimeter. I didn't think that it was all that sophisticated, but there's a lot of nuance to these opportunities. So we took that one relationship that Chris had and brought to the table and really took that. And I said, yeah, you know, this eye center that was being built downtown, we just did that job and tried to leverage that job to land 3 more. And so it's been a lot of guerrilla strategies like that. That was probably the most satisfying experience, number one, to do a commercial job and to see it start to finish. It was incredibly satisfying. And really going back to what I wanted out of work, I like seeing the fruit of my labor. I don't like a lot of strategizing and talking and planning. I like to do the work too and see what we created together. So just in a couple of months to see that come together was incredibly satisfying, but also just it helped deepen and strengthen the partnership that we had with the former owners, because I think they really started to appreciate, okay, she doesn't just want to run this business. She doesn't just want to tell us what to do. She wants to learn this business. And so I think I earned a lot of respect and credit with those guys by hustling through this first commercial job, which, you know, went pretty well overall. So it just took that first one and then leveraging the heck out of that one to say, look how great these floors look. Wouldn't you like us to do something similar in your space as well?
Yeah. And I think we had an intern over the summer that did a lot of social media posting of, you know, hey, these are the jobs that we've done. These are things that you can, you know, and sort of had a strategy there.
I loved having the experience of having an intern, not only to have additional hands, but to sort of try before we buy with an office coordinator. It really helped us realize we don't need an administrative professional. We need somebody that's got a lot more heft and experience and clout to be able to assert themselves with the installers, assert themselves with the internal team and with general contractors and our customers as well. So I think it was a great way for us to try on a lot of different strategies with social media, with referral marketing to see where we got a little bit of traction and what was worthy in investing in later in the fall after she went back to school.
Yeah, I think one of the things we're learning, at least that I'm starting to learn, is there are different levers within that sort of commercial flooring community that you can pull, but I don't know that a lot of it's going to be sending flyers and sending emails to these places. I think it's going to be a lot of, who do I know that knows somebody there, or do I know somebody there? Can I get connected? Property managers. They're the ones that make a lot of decisions around who gets to bid on jobs and who gets those jobs. So we're thinking about how can we get connected to the commercial and even large, you know, multifamily property management groups in town to say, hey, every time you're flipping an apartment, let us bid on a job. Or, you know, when you're flipping one tenant out for another tenant in a commercial space, just give us an opportunity on one of those. We've got some personal relationships like Katie mentioned. I went out to lunch with the guy. I said, you've got a new flooring person. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, we bought a flooring business. So, you know, I've known him most of our lives. So he said, okay, well, you guys are family. Yep, you're my new flooring guy. So, you know, just leveraging some relationships like that. And those were things that we talked about before we even made a bid on the business was, you know,
Do we know people?
That could help us grow this in the future, which was, you know, one of the advantages of buying a local business. You could think like that.
The other thing that we do is we bid on closed bid opportunities through Builders Exchange, where it's just an open bid process. The margins are much slimmer there, but again, it's a great way to get your foot in the door at a lower margin. Make sure you bid it accurately. That, you know, there's a ton of risk on if you miss a page in the floor plan, or you forgot that the auditorium had some specialty flooring, or whatever the case may be. But that's a great way to earn new business, of course, but also build your reputation with that property management company and with that general contractor and with other trades that will say they were a great group to work with because they came in, they did what they said they were going to do, and they met the timeline. We have learned very quickly, and our sellers were very clear about floors come last. No matter how long the construction timeline is, flooring is always last. And sometimes that means that you are working nights and weekends to do a 3-week job in a 6-day period, because even if everybody else runs behind, the deadline's still the deadline of when the job needs to be turned over to the owner. So just making sure that you're working with teams who have that full and complete understanding is, we'll keep you busy, we'll give you good work, we'll make sure the job site is ready and prepped for you, but you may have to double time it to deliver for our customers. And if you do, and if you deliver that good work, we'll be called on to do more good work in the future.
I have a question for you. Excuse me. Congratulations. Great success story. I grew up just to the east of Evansville.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
I haven't lived there for 35 years, but I know
Maybe
the
you have some
territory.
introductions for us.
Yeah, maybe. But I have actually been in the commercial construction industry for the last 35 years.
Oh,
So
amazing.
happy to brainstorm if you want to talk about the commercial markets,
Yeah.
strategies, angles, and I've been in the marketing and sales and kind of operations on the commercial side of construction. So all your contracting experiences, all your lookout fors. I would tell you, group purchasing organizations, GPOs,
Yeah.
might be a source for you. But again, lots of things. I have tons of questions. I'm just getting started with Acquira myself.
Okay.
Of 30 days, but good success story. Love to hear it. But again, if I can be a resource, happy to connect with you.
That'd
And
be great.
Yeah, thank you for that.
happy to share some ideas and angles with you, but keep up the
So
great
now
work.
I'm curious, what are you looking for with your experience? What is your investment thesis like? Have you finalized it?
Yeah, I've kind of headed towards mechanical, electrical, home services. The commercial construction has been in the HVAC and the technical sides of HVAC stuff. So kind of in that residential commercial play. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm looking for my business I'm looking at is in the Florida market.
Okay.
I live in Minnesota, but we're relocating to Florida in the next
Okay.
12 months. No surprise.
Yeah, I see your background. That's not a surprise.
That is right. But yeah, the HVAC industry is probably where I'm leaning in pretty strong, pretty wide net in Florida because we can go kind of anywhere. We already own a house down there, but we're open to moving other places as well.
Okay. Well, great.
Cool. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.
Can you
Yeah,
have
Sean, I
a
think-
question in the chat?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at it now. So, I think, Andy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the product that we used with Acquira is no longer available. Is that correct? The Acquira Plus?
Yes, but we have a different program, which is much like the A plus. Maybe what you can share is to them is the first 90 days or 120 days, how it looked like, especially that you're going through the program or the training.
Yeah. Okay. So Acquira was very involved in our search. So while we were doing our own search for businesses, Acquira was also running a search on our behalf and presenting it, like doing early due diligence based on our investment criteria to do early vetting on those and then essentially presenting us with opportunities. We looked at probably 4 or 5, I would say, originally, and then we sort of pivoted and said, hey, I think we want to narrow in our search closer to home. and then continued to get a couple of other opportunities even while we were vetting Flooring Concepts, the business that we ultimately purchased. But yeah, they were instrumental in all of the work that we did, helped write and craft the LOI, they helped us find a group that did our financial diligence once we had the LOI in place on Flooring Concepts. They also made a recommendation on the lawyer that we ended up using to craft the agreements and all of that work. So yeah, they were always on call and available. I think we had weekly calls with Rich once we got into that sort of diligence process and had gotten that LOI in place. So we had weekly calls with Rich, and then he was always available for questions. We had other folks that we could ask questions of as well.
I think the other thing that I found incredibly helpful, because I know you weren't able to come, but participating in the workshop and just having the opportunity to engage with other AEs. The timing of our workshop, I went in September of 2024. So we had done early diligence on this opportunity. We were considering putting together an LOI. The real hang up I had was how small the team was. You know, what if the sellers don't want to work closely with us? And what if the other two guys just quit? So it felt like a huge risk going into this business where we had no familiarity with the industry. And it was great to interact with AEs and other Acquira leaders to sort of strategize, ask them for this. The worst they can say is no, or try asking them for that, or try to earn their trust in this way. And just having those 2 days over a weekend was incredibly helpful to me, just to kind of build confidence in, all right, there's several different ways to tackle these challenges. And it was good for us to kind of workshop it truly and get clear on what are the challenges and how do we want to identify, or how do we want to address it, and what's another acceptable solution that we might consider. So I thought that was incredibly helpful.
Thank you for that. And by the way, for everyone, if anything comes up, like what they've mentioned, you can connect directly with Rich and include Nathan. If you can get hold of them, feel free to let me know, Slack me. I'll definitely reach out to them and share their Calendly so you can schedule a call. All right, well, we have a couple of minutes left. Do you have any further questions for Chris and Katie?
Elaborating on the seller financing. Did we start with 50%? I think we started with 20.
We started with more.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I think it was 20 or 25.
Yeah, and our whole explanation, and that actually came out of the workshop. And I think it was, I forget who said, you know, be bold. What's the worst that they could say is, no, that's not a good fit for us. Explain that you really need their support and their partnership. Let's, you know, start with, I think we asked for a 3-year deferral at 20 or 25%, and we ended up with a 2-year deferral, interest only.
Right, but the terms of our SBA loan are that to pay the seller financing, we have to get approval from the bank,
Oh, that
which
was
means
the
it's
hang-up.
not in our hands. So
Okay.
the bank sits in that first loss position, and they're not going to let cash flow get anybody else other than operating the business without their say so. So sometimes it's you know, for us, it was a little bit of a couple of times we had to go back to the sellers and say, look, the bank is forcing us to do this. You know, it was almost good cop, bad cop, and we could use the bank as the bad cop. So we ended up in a good place, I think, but there were a couple of provisions that we had to have added to the agreement after the bank reviewed the agreements because the bank required it, which from a negotiating perspective, it makes it simpler because we could just say, hey, the bank's requiring us to do this. And in most instances, it was in our, it was to our advantage what the bank was requiring. So that was helpful.
We didn't spend a lot of time talking about this too, but the sellers had a very strong broker who worked for the deal, even though it was the sellers who retained him and paid the commission to him. He was absolutely working for the deal and was a big asset for us in educating the sellers on this is typical, this is not unusual, this makes a lot of sense. And also, I think he helped us earn the confidence of the sellers that these guys have run businesses before. They won't run it into the ground. They just want some assurance that you will help them transfer the knowledge, the expertise, these relationships that are so important and are going to be integral to growing the business beyond this first year. So that was not as big of a challenge as I thought it would be.
I think the QE took 30 days.
Yeah, that was pretty quick. And it was pretty clean too.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, it didn't go into the black hole and then 30 days later they came back. There was an iterative process where we got to see a lot of the information probably 2 weeks in based on what they were looking at. It was a very clean business. Again, a lot of things had been prepared for this business to be sold. They had made a lot of cleanup in the accounting, probably 18 to 24 months before we ever saw them, with the understanding of some of these things need to be done to be able to sell this business. So a lot of that had already been done. So there weren't any real, there were no skeletons in the closet, so to speak, that came out of the QOE. I think so we did some of our own diligence on the market and the competitiveness in the market. What we discovered is that, where we live in Louisville, Jefferson County is much more competitive than where they are in Sellersburg. They are, I don't want to say they're the only game in town, but there's very little competition, especially in the commercial space, in that Southern Indiana market. So it's a very robust business with a good standing and a good base for us to leverage that to then look to expand into Louisville. And we, as Katie said, there are at least one or two other flooring related businesses in the Louisville market that have either been on the market for sale or are trying to sell. So I think there's opportunities in the market to fill some gaps in the Louisville space.
But I think, Nick, answering your question or addressing your question is we did some high level Googling. Honestly, we did not talk to any other floor store owners. I wish we would have done a little more diligence there, especially when now I appreciate that it is a supportive community, a very collaborative community. And as long as you stay in your lane and stay in Southern Indiana and keep doing churches and schools, that no one will feel especially threatened by you. But we didn't dot every I and cross every T. We felt like once we had some assurances that the business was sound financially, and based on our experience and also based on the timeline of these commercial projects and knowing that the work in progress was still millions of dollars with projects slated through the fall of 2025, we basically set our watches and said, okay, we've got 9 months to figure this out, to figure out how to drive additional revenue. So that's what we felt really good about, is there was a timeline and a revenue cycle that was pre-built, that it wasn't just one fountain was gonna shut off one day and we needed to get the next one going. But I wish we would have talked to, even in other markets, other flooring stores. By coincidence, my brother's friend from high school bought a flooring business 1.5 years ago. So when I told my brother randomly, like, oh, I've transitioned from pet insurance to flooring, he was like, are you messing with me? My best friend from high school just did this. So I was able to talk to him. They do much more residential work, but we've developed a great rapport and talk maybe once every 6 weeks about what we're learning in the business. He was also in a different industry stepping into flooring. So I think there's a lot more collaboration among small business owners that we didn't really tap into. And that was certainly a risk.
Well, I think you remind me though, is that you can try and do all the external research you want. You can't locally call other competitors to be and say, hey, what are your margins?
Right.
Right.
But you
Yeah.
can call in other states and just have the friendly, then they're open to sharing because it's a different state. There's no competition.
Yeah.
Might be different locally, but you can get an idea. But internally, the company you were looking at, you had the many, many years of pipeline financials to look at.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You could then look externally at like, well, how is this MSA growing? You know, we know this to be true at this point, and these, like you said, this is the pipeline. So yeah, this is very helpful. I hadn't looked at it in the inverse of like, well, if the company is healthy and these are its margins and it's growing, so therefore,
Yeah.
we
And
can
it
get-
gives you opportunity that if you want to expand, you can leverage some margin there to land jobs potentially, because you know you've got robust margins in sort of your in the area where you have a moat. You can extend yourself maybe and say, hey, I'll do it for a little bit less margin to get my foot in the door with something that I'm looking to expand into, you know, prove ourselves, do quality work, and then over time those margins can creep back up.
Yeah, and if there's anything I've learned from starting companies, man, you better start it in an industry that's got a healthy enough margin to play with. Like you can't
Yeah,
be
right.
squeaking by.
Yeah.
Also, that's covered a lot of my mistakes early on, like knowing like, oh, I forgot we have to order the trim work with the floor. Got it. Next time I will. But of course, the customer already had the quote, so it allowed me to learn without losing money.
Yeah.
I know, Daniel, you had one question too about any mistakes that we learned from. The only thing that I would say is Rich especially and the whole Acquira team pushed hard on working capital and asked for more than you need. I'm like, let's not be silly. Let's not be offensive or ridiculous.
Be offensive.
Be
Ask
offensive and
for every
ridiculous.
penny. Ask them to leave every penny in the business that you can get out of them.
We haven't had a bad experience because we've had enough. We have a $450,000 line of credit through Huntington. In addition, we had hundreds of thousands of dollars in working capital that were left in the business. And still, we've had to tap that line occasionally, paying it back 10 to 20 days later, because our line of credit, for example, with one of our key suppliers is just $200,000. Well, on a big job, a big school that we're working on, we needed to pay cash for materials that we were ordering because we didn't have enough credit with the supplier. So it's just things like that where cash really is king, and making sure you have access to it so that you can say yes to the things that are going to grow your business. You know, we haven't had a scary experience with it yet, but I'm so glad we have access to capital so we can do the things that we need to do and grow the business with the way we need to grow it.
But yeah, just dumb stuff, non-business related. So like one of the air conditioning units went out because of hail damage. That it didn't come up in any of the inspections that the bank did, that any of our people did. It's just,
So we had to buy a new
so you had to,
commercial
yeah,
HVAC
we were
unit.
able to file a claim, but you know, you're out of the pocket for that cash for a certain period of time.
We've had a lot of trouble with our forklifts. We're probably going to have to buy a new battery for that. It's just those types of unexpected things that you don't want to have to say, oh, we can't say yes to this opportunity because we have to fix our forklift. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
So ask for as much cash as possible.
Yes, be offensive.
So I think that's it. And I want to thank both of you, Chris and Katie, for sharing openly to the team. I mean, this will definitely help everyone. And yeah, thanks everyone for being part of this. So this is what makes the journey real. So,
Yep.
yep. Thanks
We're on
everyone.
the Slack channel. If anybody has any random questions along the way, please feel free to reach out. We're very interested in paying it forward, lessons we've learned.
Cool. Thanks for that.
All right.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.